Remember what WWW stands for? The World Wide Web? When the internet truly went global nearly a quarter century ago, there was much rejoicing at the prospect of news at the speed of light and a global conversation where informed citizens could share news. Never has humanity had access to so much news, often in real time, and never have traditional media outlets like newspapers, radio, and even television felt such a decline. Here in France, as you can see, it's the annual Press and Media Week in French schools. Our own Derek Thomson, who's with us, was there in one of the classrooms for France 24's Truth or Fake unit to go over some simple tenets of fact-checking we can all follow in a world where lies and misinformation seem to spread much faster than the truth. How to sort fact from fiction in the era of unfiltered access to information. Friday's tragic events in Christchurch, New Zealand remind us that yes, the world is a smaller place with sometimes sinister consequences. It's not just that 17 minutes of live streaming on Facebook Live that are chilling. It's the fact that there was an echo chamber of half-truths, conspiracy theories, and outright lies that enabled a white supremacist to carry out the terror attack against 2 mosques. It's about more than just checking our own facts. How to expose the misinformation that comforts convenient conspiracy theories, that can break down trust in the public space and trigger everything from, well, measles outbreaks to terror attacks. Today in the France 24 debate, we're taking a look at how to tell right from wrong in the age of social media. And joining us with us is Derek Thomson, editor-in-chief, as promised, of the France 24 Observers. I want to thank as well Nathalie, instructor at the CLEMI, that's the French Education's Ministry's Media and Information Training Program. You train teachers.
Yes, that's right.
All right. Jackson Webster, cybersecurity consultant for Legal Cluster. What's Legal Cluster in a word?
It's a legal technology company, so we work with lawyers and law firms to better secure their information systems.
Better secure their information systems. Thanks for joining us. And we want to welcome from Berlin, Christoph, campaign director for the civic advocacy group of VAZ. And you've been taking a look at how fast that social media half-truths and misinformation spread, particularly lately with a report that you put out on the Yellow Vests movement. We'll talk about that in a moment. Thanks for joining us from Berlin. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yes, there's that term, fake news. Derek, we can show an excerpt from the report that you filed with Claire Pacalin.
Fake news. Everyone's talking about it.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news?
It's all fake news.
But what exactly is fake news? Because it doesn't just mean news coverage that a political leader doesn't like.
Fake news is simply information that is presented as being true, but is not. It's information that is factually incorrect. We're going to show you some examples of fake news and teach you some tools and some techniques that will help you stay smart and avoid getting fooled.
A lot of fake news consists of images that have been taken out of context. It's the caption that's fake, not the photo or the video itself.
Recently arrived migrants attack, destroy, and rob shops in Spain.
This video has been circulating in Spain and in France too. The caption reads, "Recently arrived migrants attack, destroy, and rob shops in Spain."
So how can you check whether it's true? You need to do some detective work. First off, look at who posted the item. In this case, an account apparently dedicated to spreading negative information about migrants. So be careful, they have an agenda. Next, look at the video for clues. Here you can see a date, November 19th, 2015. Not recent. So you take the date, you put it into Google along with the keyword looting, and you see what you get. Students loot Chouanet University Cafe.
So this didn't happen in Europe at all. It was in South Africa. Students who looted a cafe during demonstrations over an increase in tuition fees. So when you see a video targeting a certain group, migrants in this case, ask yourself, did it really happen that way? Find the first appearance of the video online. That will usually give you an idea of the original context.
Derek Thomson, a couple of points. First of all, let's get our definitions straight here. You describe what fake news is. How do you feel about using that terminology, since it's employed so often by the U.S. president? Is that the...
Here's the thing. I have an emotional attachment to the word fake news because fake is a great word.
You like using the term.
With a reservation. The problem is that the U.S. president and the heads of state of lots of other countries, Syria, the Philippines, etc., they have all appropriated the term fake news simply to mean news that they don't like.
Well,
so I don't like
French
that.
president as well, Emmanuel Macron, has used it.
Yeah, everyone's done it. All political leaders are doing it, and I don't like that. People in the fact-checking business, I'm a fact-checker, if you like. Our business is to try to debunk fake news and teach people the tools so they can debunk it themselves. We prefer the term false news. So the responsible part of me says false news, but fake is a more fun word.
Fake is a more fun word. Nathalie, Terrades, you comfortable with that term, fake news?
Yes,
That works for you.
that was.
Jackson?
Fake news is perhaps a bit reductive. I think disinformation is a little bit more intentional. When you're saying disinformation, you're looking more from the sort of objective view of the person or the organization who's spreading this particular information, right? So fake news can just objectively be a thing that is not true, whereas disinformation more shows an active participation of the informing party to deceive someone.
It depends if it's intentional or not, of course.
That's true.
That's an important point. Christoph Schott, when we explain about those images, and when you saw in that excerpt those images that were from riots in South Africa in 2015 being portrayed as migrants in Spain looting a shop, how aware do you think the general public is on the kind of clues that Derek was talking about in that excerpt?
I don't think enough. Like what we have looked at in the Yellow Vest research on Facebook was very similar things. There was one set of pictures going viral saying the media and the government are trying to hide these pictures from you, so share them. And the main picture of that was a bleeding woman on the streets looking like it's on Paris, but actually was from Madrid from 2012. So we have seen that happening in France in the Yellow Vests, millions of views, millions of shares, and we don't believe that the public is aware enough, and we believe there's no good systems yet to actually give the truth a chance to catch up with all the fake news out there. Like you guys are doing a great job on fact-checking, the AFP does, Le Monde, all of these great fact-checkers do the job, but then where does it go, right? Like that's the main problem we have. The lies spread faster than the truth, and there's no mechanism yet on Facebook and other platforms to go back to all these people and say, oh, that image that you've seen is actually from Madrid and from 2012. And that's what we believe could change the calculation a bit. All
right, Christoph, can we ever fight it? Because if I say the word fact-checking to you, that sounds laborious, like if you've had just a hard day's work. Now we're going to do some fact-checking. Oh, that sounds like hard work. Whereas the people who are disseminating the misinformation, the disinformation, depending on what it is, the false news, the fake news, they're appealing to our emotions. Look at this thing. It's made me hopping mad. How do you fight against people who are pressing our emotional buttons?
So I believe, one, there's a lot of academic studies out there now that show that factual information can fight back against the disinformation. But I agree with you. I think we have to be, this can just be kind of to make the battlefield more even, to give the truth more of a chance to kind of stand in the kind of in the same arena as the lies. And then there's still like all of us who have to bring out the hopeful messages, right? Like you can see it's an attack in Christchurch. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of children march for the future of humanity. And what does all the media report about? Mostly the attack in Christchurch, right? And there's a place where on one side, we believe there's mechanisms where you can make sure that all those fact checks reach all those people who have seen the fake information. In the Yellow Vest report we've done, we've found over 100 million views of factually incorrect information or on purposely misleading information. And that is tragic, right? Like that's a real big deal. And we believe that is addressed. If there's a way to get back to people, inform them about it, correct the information, then there is still a lot of room for all of us in civil society like us to also build the positive narratives, to go on the streets and to march for what we believe in. And I think that is, we only have a chance to do that well if there is some kind of a level playing field that we play on between the truth and the lies.
Okay, but we live, Jackson, in the age of the echo chamber. So on Saturday in Paris, you had the Yellow Vest movement and you had a climate change march. Those who are interested in the climate change issue, they're all talking to each other on social media. Those who are interested in the Yellow Vest movements are all talking to each other on social media. How do you get the two to meet?
Well, this is, I mean, having a way to disseminate information to a large audience is always going to be problematic. But I think it's more, an essential issue to look at is how the tools that are disseminating these information are structured, right? So first of all, your initial point about, the emotive nature of disinformation. If we look at the viral structure of a newsfeed-based platform like LinkedIn or Facebook, I mean, you're always going to have more emotive news getting more reactions, negative, positive, it doesn't really matter. It'll still be more prominent in people's news feeds, compared to perhaps a different tool like Twitter, where you have complete control over who you are and aren't listening to by who you do and don't follow. And so it's quite liberating in that you can, immediately, decide what news you're going to receive. But then, of course, it can also cause problems. But
it can also cause problems, and there are those who disseminate this false news or fake news, as you will, and then there are those who amplify it, Derek.
Yeah, that's something that we try to do. When we talk to people, we remind them that whoever is at the origin of this fake news, they could be hard right groups, they could be racist, they could be Russian propagandists, whatever, whoever they are, they create the news, they sow the seed, if you like, and they put it onto social media. And then, as Jackson says, it goes viral. The structure of social media is inherently viral, and then it takes off. But the people
some of it is about the fake news, and some of it is about who's sharing the fake news.
We share it because it's irresistible. We are much more likely to share something that is tasty, that is controversial, that is fun, than to share something that's just a boring report on the economy. And so there's something, and there are studies, the famous MIT study on Twitter, that showed that fake news travels something like 7 times as fast as true news. So there's something also inherently human that we join these social communities because we want to belong to a group. We want to amuse and to please our peers in that group. So there's something, as Jackson says, there's something inherently wrong about any social medium, also social media network, that encourages people to send tasty, funny things that they haven't necessarily checked to their friends.
When I look at young people, I'm always wondering, are they unaware of this, or have they factored it in better than we have? That they get what Derek is saying about that.
They can be unaware or not, but the problem is that they can find these fake news or even conspiracy speeches or hate speech, etc. So the role of the school is very important to make them critical, to explain them that they should find a source who wrote this, who spread this, and. It is very important to strengthen their critical view.
Is it possible because if they're hearing it from their teachers, it's just not as cool as if it's a friend sharing something on Snapchat or on Instagram, is it?
Yes, but some teachers deal with the issue by deconstructing the stereotypes, showing them the mechanism of how it has been created. Sometimes, yes, it should work. It works sometimes, most of the time. But if the teachers take the time to really talk with the kids, really show them how it works, and tell them that they have a responsibility if they share also these news.
All right, sharing the news.
Francois, can I just object? You said that fact-checking was boring, and okay, it is. It sounds a little bit boring. You call it fact-checking. It's not the most exciting thing in the world. We're trying to make it sexy and fun. That's why we tell kids that it's like detective work. We try to make it into a game. People, I think, in general, kids and older people, like to know the behind the scenes things that are going on, how the news is made, how news travels, and so we try to make it kind of cool to know more than your peers about where the information comes from, to know these cool tools like TinEye, which is a Russian photograph search tool. We try to make it cool because whenever they rain on someone's parade, if they tell their friends have just shared a cool meme and they say, wah, 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 it's fake or something, they're not going to want to do that themselves unless they can make it cool and they can say, it's fake and this is how I learned it, this is how I detected it.
Christoph Schott, have you witnessed an evolution on that front? Has it become cooler to fact check?
So I like the approach of thinking of it like detective work, because we have just launched a team that is trying to protect the European election from disinformation, and we see it similarly. Like, so you have to really go deep, find the clues, look for what's weird, and try to find out what's behind all of it. And I think a pretty recent study has shown that older people are more likely to share fake news than younger people. So there's some argument that young people might be more on the front foot on that. What worries me the most, my daughter is now just turned 3 years old, and I doubt that when she turns whatever 16, she will read much of Der Spiegel or watch France 24. She will just go on like YouTube or Instagram or Facebook to get her news. And if I see what she's seeing, if she types in yellow vests on YouTube, and likely one of the main videos will be from RT France or from some other kind of conspiracy theory or far-right group, that really worries me. Like, I really believe in quality journalism, and I think our kids should have the same approach and then the broadness of information. And I'm worried that if we're not able to get hold of this problem, the detective work will do a good job to train the children, but it might not be enough. So I think we have to think one step ahead of how do we make sure that we have
Let me ask you a question on that point, Christoph, because in your report, you do a great job of exposing how fast erroneous or fake stories have spread since the Yellow Vest movement began back in November. And you do a good job of explaining how Russia Today's French language site, RT France, has become a cheerleader for the Yellow Vests movement. But can we empirically say that RT France spreads fake news?
We did not, in this report, did focus on if RT France spread fake news. To be honest, we have not found much on the RT France Yellow Vest example that was bluntly fake news. It seems to be also a bit of the new strategy where they rather go in and amplify the most kind of divisive, polarized kind of narratives. And then, as you might have seen, there's videos of protesters of the Yellow Vest chanting, "Thank you, RT, thank you, RT," because they have seen them as the medium that actually believes them, that talks to them, and that kind of supports them. And they are the most watched YouTube channel on YouTube, on Yellow Vest, right? Like, I don't know the specific numbers, but many, many, many more views than France 24 or Le Monde or L'Obs or Huffington Post. And that worries me. And I think there can be ways where we find sensible ways for YouTube, for example, in the way they now deal with conspiracy theories, where they say, we don't delete them. Why should we delete that stuff? We shouldn't, right? Freedom of speech, number one. But there could be ways that they don't give, for example, RT France or other far-right hate groups, free promotion. Because right now, about 70% of all the YouTube views are recommended views. And YouTube gives free promotion to all these hate groups, far-right groups, to conspiracy theories. And we believe there could be a way that you would be public about what kind of channels you don't push as far out as you would do with more trustworthy, authoritative kind of content.
All right, I want to get the reaction of the rest of the panel to this question of what's the difference between an editorial bias and fanning the flames of hate. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're marking Media Week in French schools. Our own Derek Thomson, our editor-in-chief of the France 24 Observers, was in school earlier. We'll talk about that more in a moment. Also with us, Nathalie Terrades. She's in school a lot. She's an instructor at the CLEMI, which is the French Education Ministry's Media and Information Training Program. Welcome back. Welcome back to Jackson Webster, a cybersecurity consultant for Legal Cluster, and from Berlin, Christoph Schott, campaign director for the civic advocacy group Avaz. Christoph, who was saying just before the break, Jackson, how RT France spreading not fake news stories, phony stories, or lies outright, but really pressing an editorial bias. How do you, again, there's a gray area here as to whether or not it's a purveyor as such of misinformation, of false news stories.
Well, that's exactly the complication with an entity like Russia Today or like Sputnik, its print counterpart, or any of these other sort of state-sponsored news apparati. The issue is that you can sort of legitimize stories that might not be false, but are either exaggerated or slightly misreported or have some sort of editorial agenda. You can legitimize them by shrouding them in a bunch of non-fake news. So much of what, the vast majority of the content that's coming out of these outlets is the same as any other news outlet. It's just simply got a specific editorial bias.
That's nothing new. I mean, that's how France colonized Algeria in 1830. They spread this false story about.
That's true, but what is new about Russia Today specifically is that the idea of a originally nationally held news outlet broadcasting in many different languages and having drastically different editorial lines in each language. So if we look at the way that certain controversial issues like Israel-Palestine, for example, are treated between the different languages, the Arabic language version of Russia Today being very critical of Israel and the French language and some others being less critical. And so it's interesting to watch sort of how the agenda can be shaped specifically to the audience and how using social media you can target that audience with the content that might persuade them to accept your view.
And again, that's nothing new either. We saw, for instance, The Sun, when there was the Scottish referendum, the English edition of it and the Scottish edition of it had completely different coverages of the same event. What's different, though, is the speed at which, again, all of this is conveyed, how fast the information moves nowadays.
Absolutely, and Russia has been particularly good at capitalizing on the sort of fast-moving nature of the modern information environment. I mean, this is what Russia's been doing for a number of years now with, what we refer to as hybrid warfare techniques and stuff like this, and all the troll farming that was done around the 2016 election is taking sort of tried and true methods of persuasion and propaganda and adapting them to a new environment that they've been able to master.
We heard a tweet this Monday, Christoph shot from the U.S. president, who complained that what he calls the mainstream media are going to accuse him, he says, of somehow being responsible for the New Zealand terror attack, saying, again, it's fake news. Those were the terms he employed.
I cannot comment on what Mr. Trump said on his Twitter account, but we've seen, looking rather briefly on what happened in Christchurch, was it might have been something like one of the first social media announced massacres. Like he posted right before on HN, one of those kind of far-right conspiracy forums. He ran it on Facebook Live. It was on YouTube, on Twitter. I think Facebook said they had to take down 1.5 million videos, 1.5 million times the video of the killing. Who was uploading all that stuff? Right, so we are seeing that this person likely has been influenced by conspiracy theories like the great, what's it called?
Great replacement theory.
The great replacement theory, thank you, conspiracy theory, that the idea that the Europeans and the white race is being replaced by people from the Middle East or by migrants, and that on his weapon he said, this is for the UN migration deal, and all those kind of things where that they have been far spreading on social media. He referenced a lot of memes to that. So we believe what we're seeing here is that social media is actually radicalizing at least some of our people, and that is really dangerous. And we have to be, I believe, more aware, more on the front foot, and talk more about this issue regarding to Christchurch, to understand it and to do something about it.
The number of people that are that extreme is minute. Do you blame them, or do you blame the social media that allow them to broadcast? He was able to broadcast for 17 minutes on Facebook Live during the shooting.
This one's a tough one, right? We believe in freedom of speech. I don't believe there should be kind of an upload filter that looks at the content right before. I think Facebook might have been able to catch it faster and then move faster to delete this kind of content. We believe content like this or violence-inciting content should be taken down. But it will not be possible, right? It will not be possible to stop everything. And that is why we need measures in place that protect freedom of speech, but they also then go back to the people, inform them better, and there's actually a way that you can go, like the way the terrorism content from ISIS and other groups are being treated, you should think similarly about kind of far-right, extremist, white, nationalist, terrorist content, actually, and just treat it similarly. If it's about to make people more extreme and violent inciting, you should do something about it.
By the way, it's not just radical extremists. Sometimes the road to hell is indeed paved with good intentions. It's another one of the segments put forth by Derek Thomson and Claire Pacalin.
Sometimes people who create fake information think they're doing it for a good cause, but it's still fake. Take a look at this picture. On the left, an iceberg supposedly photographed in 2008. On the right, what you think is the same iceberg 10 years later in 2018. The best way to check photos online is via a reverse image search. Just right-click on an image in Google Chrome, then search Google for image. You'll see where else an image has been posted. Here, the photo on the left was actually taken in 2016 by NASA. It shows the Getz ice shelf in the Antarctic. The one on the right was taken in 2018, but in the Arctic, at the other end of the Earth. It's not the same iceberg at all. The person who posted these pictures wanted to highlight a problem that is of course very real: polar ice melting because of global warming. But he ended up confusing the issue by posting two photos that had nothing to do with each other. It's weird because there are tons of pictures online documenting polar ice melt.
All right, and lots of reactions to that. Yeah, you saw in that segment, Jackson Webster, the road to hell is paved with good intentions sometimes.
Of course, yes, and of course, you know, I'm sure that many people who are sharing, perhaps, you know, if we're talking about Gilets jaunes, you know, many people who are sharing, you know, fake news that has been generated or disinformation is generated by outlets like RT are doing it with good intentions and legitimately out of concern for, you know, the right to protest. But whether or not something is done with good intentions has little bearing, of course, on its factual nature.
And also, it backfires. In the case of that video, people who deny climate change, even though the vast majority of scientists confirm it, people who deny it actually picked up on those images and said, this is bad science on the part of people who talk about climate change.
When you described those tools for checking a photo, did you get a sense when you were at a school earlier that they were aware that these tools existed, or?
No.
No, you didn't.
No, not today. It's something that teachers around the world are trying to teach, but it's very, very hard because the problem is that the tools change and the techniques of the people making fake news change every couple of months. So it's very hard to integrate the latest tools and tips into any national curriculum. And we're talking to the French authorities like Clémy to see how we can do that in the future. But it's very hard. It's a challenge.
All right, let's talk about the awareness again among young people, because it is the French week of media in schools. Derek was talking about his visit to a school in Paris's 15th arrondissement. Let's take a look. It's a report read by Catherine Viette.
Monday morning at Buffon High School in Paris, a special session with librarian Isabelle Incapi.
How can you verify the source of an article or a photo?
Following a wave of terrorist attacks that began in 2015, media education has been mandatory for all middle and high school students since September 2016. These freshmen have some classes on the subject each month.
This is exactly what must be done to allow them to become more independent regarding the proliferation of images and information.
Today, the students are watching a special program made by France 24 to support the Press and Media Week.
Les fausses informations, tout le monde en parle.
Fake news.
Fake news. Fake news.
Fake news.
It's all fake news.
The goal is to teach them tools they can use on their own to avoid falling into the trap of sharing misinformation online. The students spend a lot of time on social media.
Donc, qui est sur Snapchat? Qui est sur Instagram?
But most are not aware of the verification tools.
Levez la main si vous avez déjà fait une recherche d'image inversée.
Now it's time to practice.
Enregistrer l'image sous.
Not a simple task, the students are struggling.
Tout le monde y arrive, ça va?
Now they're getting the hang of it.
These are yellow vests at Clermont-Ferrand, but in fact it's an image of the semi-finals of a rugby match in 2017.
These students have learned how to verify the source of images online, and they say they'll double-check before sharing. But the question remains, will their friends do the same?
If you're worried about the sharing of fake news on Facebook, Derek Thomson has some good news for you on that front. The students you spoke to don't use Facebook.
No, they don't. It's the same thing. Whenever I talk to high school students in France and around the world, they say they use Snapchat, they use WhatsApp, they use Instagram stories and just traditional Instagram. But Facebook, they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, why would I be on Facebook?
Why don't they use Facebook?
They don't use it. They see it as an older person's thing. They're on Instagram. Mark Zuckerberg actually he acknowledged this recently, and he said that Facebook is going to switch towards more closed messaging like WhatsApp, which they already own, and also messages that disappear like Instagram stories that only have a life of 24 hours. He knows that that's the way people are going. People prefer to share things privately. It's a big tendency that's happening in social media. So rather than sharing publicly on Facebook and Twitter, more and more people are going to platforms like WhatsApp that just sends a message from one device to another, and you can have a private group.
Isn't that going to make things harder, though? Christoph Schott, we've seen the concerns over WhatsApp in places like India ahead of the general election there.
Yes, we believe WhatsApp is a beautiful tool. I use it all the time. I just send a picture of me being in the studio to my family group because I was kind of proud to be here. And on the other side, we've seen it especially in, like as you said, in India, for people spreading conspiracy theories about people standing at the side road and then saying they're stealing children. And then people murder them. Actually, fake news have killed people in India. And we've seen something very similar happening in Brazil, where there was a coordinated effort to spread fake news, like the opposite candidate would be supporting pedophilia in his book, or that voting machines were rigged. And in the end, we ran a poll in Brazil, and those people who voted for Bolsonaro, including those who voted, who changed their voting intention to him, we got almost 90% of those people to believe at least one of those kind of top 5 fake news that have spread. And many of them have been disseminated by WhatsApp. And that is what we believe is a beautiful tool, but also a dangerous tool because it's kind of a gray area where it's hard to see what's actually spreading and how fast.
So Facebook's announcement that it's pivoting towards more private chat groups, that's going to make the job of combating misinformation and false news harder?
So that is when, like, the detectives, right, where they have to find another way, where we likely need to find ways that just people who are in groups are able to share if they see fake news. Like in Brazil, there was a great project by lots of the newspapers called Comprova, where they had a number, a WhatsApp number, and if you saw something in the group that you believe this might be fake news, you could send it to the number, and if they got a lot of reports, they would then fact-check it, send it back to the people, and ask them to disseminate it in their groups. But as you can imagine, that is like able to reach a few of the people. And we believe there's a thing that WhatsApp could do, which is similar, where they keep encryption, but they have a separate kind of set of data of clear fake news, videos that have been fact-checked, and then once they have been fact-checked, there could be a way for WhatsApp to inform people the next time that video would be shared that it's likely fake news, and AFP have said it's wrong, and here's a correction. Like, we believe WhatsApp could have similar measures while keeping encryption, because we believe it's a great thing to have, and to have a way to just chat with our friends and not have everyone know about it.
Is that the best way forward, Jackson?
Well, encryption is certainly both like an important aspect of these platforms and a serious obstacle. I mean, there has been a lot of question as to, you know, what is happening, for example, to the metadata in WhatsApp. So the data about who you're contacting and when, not the actual content of the message, and whether or not that is being used for targeted advertisements by Facebook. And so, of course, it is important for a platform like WhatsApp to address these security concerns. But I mean, this is a debate that we saw come up after, you know, the Manchester bombing in the UK, for example, where the United Kingdom's government was unable to access, you know, the messages, the content of the messages of the perpetrators for a certain period because of the encryption, and that it wasn't able to necessarily predict or prevent these attacks because of encryption of attacks planned on WhatsApp. And so there's also the question of sort of where does the boundary between privacy and then security and law lie, and where is the role of government to both allow for the freedom of expression and privacy and the right to privacy, but then, of course, also be able to protect citizens.
We see a lot of disinformation and misinformation on WhatsApp, especially in Africa, where we're quite present, and in India. And my frustration is that all of this stuff filters to us via WhatsApp. People send us things saying, hey, is this true or is this fake? So it filters to us, and then we will fact check it, and we want to find a way to push it back down the chain. but there's no way currently to ensure that the people who sent it to us will send it to all the people that sent the thing to them in the first place. And so I would love to, if WhatsApp could develop a mechanism like Christoph was talking about, to identify fact-checked information so that people can then send that back down the chain to their friends and family to say, hey, this is what's really going on.
Yeah, WhatsApp owned by Facebook. We reached out to Facebook to try to get them to come and join us here on this show. They did not take up our invitation. We hope they will do so at a future time. Nathalie, Terrades, the move towards these little groups, private groups, Snapchat, where you send stuff and then it doesn't stay around a long time. With your students, is that inevitably the trend, or are you saying you work with them on, well, turning them into citizen journalists in a way?
Well, first, the fact that most young people just get informed through social media, search engine, etc., is a kind of problem. So we try to show them that there are other types of media and to try to educate to them. Of course, also about how information is produced. Who produces the information, where it comes from, who speaks to whom, where, how, when, etc. It is very important since they are bombarded all day long with all sorts of information from all kinds, and you just can't cut off from all this information.
Yeah, I mean, young people, they don't listen to the radio anymore. The latest ratings, by the way, for the French #1 all music station are disastrous. Nobody's listening to music anymore. News, they don't listen to it on the radio. Nobody watches the 8 o'clock news anymore unless they're above.
Not on the radio or in the car with their parents or on the internet. So they can watch some video on the they can listen to the radio on the internet sometimes.
And so with this program that you've been doing, explaining how the news is made, does that restore a measure of trust in traditional media outlets like our own?
What is very important is to establish partnerships with professionals of the media. The CLEMI relies on these very dynamic partnerships between teachers and students and journalists. And this is important because journalists show how they work. And if the students have the chance to go into the newsrooms, etc., work collaboratively with journalists and produce themselves information, they break all the representations they had and the defiance also against journalism. So I can talk to you about an example we did very recently with a school.
Which is what?
It's a project that began in December and ended just last week with a high school in Chenevière-sur-Marne, Champlain.
In the east of Paris, in the suburbs.
Yeah, it's in Chenevière, and it's a partnership between the CLEMI of Créteil and France Média Monde. So
which is our parent company. Yes.
And so it's 20 students who were volunteer to work on a topic. Kids with Spanish language students, and they worked on a topic which was to give their view of a recent phenomenon, which is the migration from Central America to the US. So they work with journalists in France 24 from the Hispanic area. So they worked together on the topic. They visited the premises and talked to the journalists. They met you, Derek. They saw the newsroom staff, and they met reporters just coming back.
So the hope with a project like that one is that then there's this sort of dissemination effect on their peers, on the other students.
Yes, because they produced themselves. They worked with the journalists on the interview techniques, and so they produced their own radio program last week.
All right, so that's good to hear. Jackson, not too long ago, you can remember when you were a student.
Yes, not too long ago. And in fact, I mean, you know, my generation sort of occupies a bizarre little hole in the whole tech story. Where, I mean, I remember when I was in, I think it was middle school, when, you know, the first iPhone came onto campus, and you know, no one knew what this technology was going to do to change our lives. But of course, I do remember, you know, having a life before social media.
Is it an erosion of trust in traditional media, or it's just simply that, well, it's a little boring, it's not as exciting as sharing stuff over all the different social media outlets we've described?
I mean, I like looking at the sort of the economics of it to figure out what's going on, specifically with local journalism. I mean, this is, if we look at what essentially how Facebook and Google and other advertiser platforms have made their money. I mean, they've essentially captured the market share that local journalism used to have. I mean, my hometown in California still has a local newspaper, but a lot don't. And there's entire swaths of the country that don't have any access to local journalism. And of course, local journalism means proximity to those who produce the information. So whilst, you know, you might have an international network like France 24, at the same time, it's good to have, you know, reporters in your community to remember that, you know, reporters are people too, and you know, to have gone to school with their kids.
when the internet became global that it would be the opposite, that this would help local media thrive.
Well, of course, you know, networks can become horizontalized. You can have a flattening effect of a network, right, where, you know, you create this ability for everyone to be their own sort of citizen journalist, or for everyone to be publishing their own content. But at the same time, we have to remember that the network has to exist on some sort of platform, right? And that's also going to bring you centralization. So, while of course, you know, in the past, it wasn't possible for just anyone to publish anything and reach such a large audience. At the same time, you had these sort of local gatekeepers of information. You know, the editors of the local newspapers. You know, those actually producing the information at the bottom
Today, there are no
of the
gatekeepers.
ecosystem. Not necessarily, but they have significantly less economic power than they used to.
Mm. What do you think of the French president's plans for a fake news law?
I think that when you're using a term like fake news that's quite weighted, we can look at how terrorism was used by, you know, the Bush administration in the 2000s to see how you can have sort of dangerous encroachments on civil liberties when you start evoking these types of terminology. I find that it's not necessarily the role of government to censor away media. I mean, perhaps I'm a little bit American in my, you know, defense of First Amendment rights, but at the same time that it's perhaps more the role of government to support, you know, an economic model that would allow other media to counter fake news.
Christoph Schott, a final word, because we're almost out of time. We're talking about the model. The model's been changing so much over the past quarter century. It still hasn't found its way. Will that model eventually be one that's more responsible and where there's less dissemination of sometimes wrong and dangerous and hateful messages?
So I have to say, I trust in the ability of the internet, right? Like, it has brought all of us closer together. I would not be able to talk to you guys right now in that way if it weren't for lots of the technologies that made humanity thrive. And that's why I believe we have to fight for it, to be something beautiful, to connect us, to bring us closer together, to tell the truth, to tell beautiful stories. And what we're up against now is just in a few months or weeks even, we have the European elections, and we are actually really concerned. We see Europe is burning and flooded with fake news, and then see the platforms and also governments all across Europe who are like bringing out the water pistols, trying to shoot a bit against the fire, but it's not enough. And what we believe is the danger if you get like laws, like fake news laws, like in Russia or in Asia, that want to criminalize fake news and go after the person who's disseminated, then we don't believe that gets us very far. We need sensible legislation. That is what Europe is good at. Like, look at both sides. Look at freedom of speech, but also look at democracy and make sure that people have a chance to get truth when they see the fake news, to make sure the algorithm just doesn't boost out anything that's out there in whatever way. And we find a way that we can use it for good again, because I believe in the internet. Like, ours would not exist without it at all. No way.
Christoph Schott, many thanks for joining us from Berlin. We'll be speaking about that very topic ahead of those May European elections. I want to thank as well Nathalie, Terrades, Derek Thomson, Jackson Webster. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.